Daniel Morrison sat across from his wife Elena at Marcello's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago, and watched her reach into her designer handbag with the kind of deliberate movement that told him something significant was about to happen. It was their 7th wedding anniversary, and Daniel had made reservations at this particular restaurant 3 months in advance, because it was where they'd had their first date 8 years ago. He'd thought they were celebrating. Elena, apparently, had other plans. "Daniel, there's something I need to give you," Elena said, her voice carrying that particular tone of practiced calmness that people use when they're about to drop a bomb and want to seem reasonable while doing it. She pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the white tablecloth, past the flickering candle and the expensive wine Daniel had ordered. Daniel stared at the envelope, his mind processing what this probably was, even as he hoped he was wrong. "What is this?" "Divorce papers. I had my attorney draw them up last week. I'm done with this marriage, Daniel. I'm done pretending to be satisfied with a life that's going nowhere, with a husband who has no ambition, no drive to be anything more than what he is. I deserve better than this mediocrity." The words hit Daniel like physical blows, but what struck him even harder was the setting Elena had chosen for this announcement. Their anniversary dinner at a restaurant full of people, a public space where she'd calculated he wouldn't make a scene. She'd planned this, orchestrated it, probably even rehearsed her speech. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born of a sudden fight. This was premeditated destruction of their marriage, delivered with cold calculation. What Elena didn't know, what she'd never bothered to investigate because she'd been so certain of her assumptions, was that the distinguished older man sitting 2 tables behind her, the one who'd nodded pleasantly at Daniel when they'd arrived, was Victor Chen, the CEO and founder of Chen Technologies, one of the largest software companies in the Midwest. Victor Chen, who'd known Daniel since Daniel was 23 years old. Victor Chen, who could explain to Elena exactly who her husband really was and what he'd actually accomplished. But Victor wouldn't need to explain anything, because over the next hour, Elena Martinez Morrison was going to reveal exactly who she was, and the revelation would cost her everything she thought she'd gain by divorcing her supposedly mediocre husband. Daniel Morrison had met Elena Martinez 6 years before this disastrous anniversary dinner. He'd been 30 years old, working as a senior software engineer at Chen Technologies, and Elena had been 26, working in marketing at a boutique consulting firm. They'd met at a tech industry mixer, and Elena had been drawn to Daniel's intelligence and quiet confidence. Daniel had been captivated by Elena's beauty and ambition. Their courtship had been relatively brief but intense. Elena came from a working-class family in Milwaukee and had worked hard to build her career in Chicago's competitive marketing world. She talked often about wanting more from life: a bigger house, better cars, vacations to exotic locations, the kind of lifestyle she'd seen wealthy clients enjoying. Daniel had understood her hunger for success because he had his own ambitions, though his were different from hers. They'd married after 14 months of dating, and for the first 2 years, things had been good. Daniel had been making a solid 6-figure salary at Chen Technologies, and Elena's income from her marketing job added to their comfortable lifestyle. They'd bought a nice 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood, drove decent cars, and lived well within their means. The problems had started in year 3, when Elena's career ambitions began to stall. She'd been passed over for a promotion twice, and her frustration had slowly transformed into resentment. She'd started comparing their life to the lives of her friends and colleagues, people whose husbands were lawyers, investment bankers, entrepreneurs with flashy startups. Elena wanted the houses in Winnetka, the luxury SUVs, the country club memberships, the Instagram-worthy lifestyle that signaled success. Daniel's steady engineering job didn't provide that level of obvious wealth, and Elena's resentment had grown. She'd started making comments about his lack of ambition, his contentment with being just an engineer. his unwillingness to take risks or chase bigger opportunities. The comments had escalated over the years from gentle suggestions that maybe he should look for better-paying positions to outright criticism of his supposed mediocrity. What Elena didn't know, what Daniel had deliberately not shared with her after her comments revealed her values, was that Daniel wasn't just a senior engineer at Chen Technologies. 3 years ago, he'd been offered a position as Chief Technology Officer, with a substantial salary increase and equity stake in the company. Daniel had accepted, but he'd made an unusual request. He wanted to continue working with the engineering teams on the floor, rather than moving to an executive office. Victor Chen had been surprised by the request, but had agreed. You want the title and the compensation, but not the visible trappings of executive status. I want to stay close to the actual work, Daniel had explained. I want to understand what our engineers are dealing with, what problems they're solving, what innovations they're creating. I can't do that from an executive suite. I need to be in the trenches. That's admirable, Daniel. But people might not understand. They might think you're not actually an executive. The people whose opinions matter will know. The rest don't matter. So Daniel had become CTO with a base salary of $350,000, plus bonuses and stock options that had grown substantially as Chen Technologies expanded. His total annual compensation package was now worth approximately $800,000. He owned equity in the company worth about $4 million. He'd invested wisely, and his personal net worth was approaching $6 million. But Daniel still worked at the same desk he'd had as a senior engineer, still wore jeans and company t-shirts to work, still ate lunch in the cafeteria with the development teams. Only a handful of people at the company knew his actual title, and Daniel preferred it that way. He'd seen what corporate politics and executive posturing did to companies, and he'd wanted no part of it. At home, Daniel had tried multiple times to have honest conversations with Elena about his role at the company, his compensation, their financial future. But Elena had shown no interest in the details. She decided that Daniel was just an engineer, that his career was going nowhere, that they'd never have the lifestyle she wanted. And once she'd decided that, she'd stopped listening to anything that contradicted her narrative. I don't want to talk about work, Elena would say, when Daniel tried to discuss his position. It's boring tech stuff that doesn't change the fact that we're not moving forward in life. But Elena, if you just look at our financial statements, you'd see, I see enough. I see that we're living in a mid-tier house while my friends are in mansions. I see that I'm driving a 3-year-old Lexus, while Caroline drives a Range Rover. I see that we're middle-class comfortable when we could be so much more. We are so much more. You're just not paying attention to... Stop. Just stop making excuses for your lack of ambition. Some people are content with mediocrity. Daniel, I'm not one of them. Those conversations had ended with Daniel frustrated and Elena dismissive, and eventually Daniel had stopped trying. If Elena wanted to believe he was unsuccessful, he couldn't force her to see reality. And truthfully, part of him wanted to see how long she'd maintain her contempt for him without bothering to verify whether her contempt was justified. The answer, apparently, was 7 years. 7 years of marriage during which Elena had grown increasingly bitter about Daniel's supposed lack of ambition, increasingly critical of his career, increasingly resentful of the life they were living. 7 years during which she'd never once looked at a tax return, never asked to see financial statements, never questioned how they could afford their comfortable lifestyle on what she thought was just Daniel's modest engineering salary. And now, on their 7th anniversary, she was serving him divorce papers in a public restaurant, confident that she was escaping from a mediocre husband and a disappointing marriage. Daniel opened the envelope slowly, his hands steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside him. He pulled out the documents and scanned them quickly. Standard divorce petition, irreconcilable differences, request for division of marital assets, and spousal support. Elena had clearly consulted an attorney, though not a very thorough one if they'd prepared these documents without investigating Daniel's actual financial situation. "You could have done this privately," Daniel said quietly. "At home, like adults. I wanted to do it somewhere you wouldn't yell or make a scene. Somewhere public where you'd have to stay calm." "You mean somewhere you could control the situation and deliver your announcement like a pronouncement from on high?" "The point is, I'm done. I've wasted 7 years waiting for you to become more than you are, and I'm not wasting any more time. I'm 33 years old, Daniel. I have time to start over, to find someone who actually has ambition, who wants to build something impressive instead of being content with mediocrity. Someone who makes more money, you mean? Someone who values success. Someone who wants more from life than a mid-level tech job and a house in a boring suburb." Daniel took a sip of his wine, buying time to control his emotions. Behind Elena, he could see Victor Chen watching that table with concern. Victor couldn't hear what they were saying, but body language told a story, and the story was clearly not a happy anniversary celebration. "Elena, do you actually know what I do at Chen Technologies? You're a software engineer. You've told me 1,000 times. What's my exact title? I don't know. Senior engineer? Lead engineer? Something like that. Does it matter? It's all the same. You write code and fix technical problems and go to boring meetings. It's not a career path to real success. Never wondered how we afford a house in a nice neighborhood and 2 cars and regular vacations on what you think I make. I assume you make around 150,000, maybe 175 with bonuses. It's fine. It's respectable. But it's not wealth, Daniel. It's middle-class comfortable. And I want more than comfortable." Daniel felt a strange calm settling over him. This was it. The moment when he'd see who Elena really was. Not who she pretended to be, not who she wanted him to believe she was, but who she actually was at her core when she thought she held all the cards. "Before I sign these papers, I want to know something. Is this really about money? Is that what our marriage has been to you? A financial arrangement that didn't meet your expectations?" Elena had the grace to look uncomfortable for a moment, but then her face hardened with resolve. "Money is part of it. Success is part of it. I want to be with someone who's going somewhere, who's building something impressive, who makes me proud when I tell people what he does. When people ask about my husband, I have to say, he's a software engineer, and watch their eyes glaze over with boredom. Do you know how that feels? Do you know how it feels to have your wife measure your worth by how impressive you sound at cocktail parties? That's not fair. It's completely fair. You just said you want someone who makes you proud when you describe his job. Not someone who's kind, not someone who's faithful, not someone who loves you and provides for you. Someone with an impressive job title that reflects well on you socially. Elena's voice rose, drawing looks from nearby tables. I want both. I want someone who loves me and who's successful. Why can't I have both? You have both. You're just too superficial to recognize it. How dare you? Elena's indignant response was interrupted by a voice behind her, cultured and authoritative. Excuse me, I apologize for interrupting, but I couldn't help overhearing parts of your conversation. Elena turned to see Victor Chen standing beside their table, immaculate in his tailored suit, his presence commanding attention. He was in his early 60s, distinguished silver hair, the kind of man who radiated success and authority. This is a private conversation, Elena said coldly. Please return to your table. In a moment. But first, I need to ask, young lady, did you just serve divorce papers to Daniel Morrison? That's none of your business. Victor's expression hardened. Actually, it's very much my business. Daniel has been one of my most valued colleagues for over a decade, and I'm concerned that you're making a catastrophic decision based on what sounds like complete ignorance. of who your husband actually is. Elena looked at Daniel with confusion, then back at Victor. Who are you? My name is Victor Chen. I'm the founder and CEO of Chen Technologies. Daniel has worked for me for 12 years, and based on what I just overheard, you don't actually know what position he holds at my company. Daniel could see the calculation happening behind Elena's eyes. She was trying to figure out why a CEO would care about one engineer's divorce, trying to understand why this obviously successful man was defending her supposedly mediocre husband. Daniel is a software engineer, Elena said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. He's worked at your company for years in various engineering roles. He's my chief technology officer, Victor said simply. He has been for the past 3 years. Before that, he was our senior vice president of engineering. Daniel oversees all technical operations for a company with 1,700 employees and annual revenue of $318 million. His base salary is $350,000. With bonuses and stock options, his annual compensation is typically around $800,000. He owns equity in Chen Technologies currently worth approximately $4 million. The color drained from Elena's face. She stared at Victor, then at Daniel, her mouth opening and closing without sound. That can't be true, Elena finally managed. Daniel would have told me. We would have asked. Would you have listened? Daniel asked quietly. I tried to tell you, Elena, multiple times. You didn't want to hear about my work because you'd already decided it was boring and unsuccessful. You made assumptions based on job titles you didn't understand, and then refused to engage with any information that contradicted those assumptions. But you dress like you work at a desk with the regular engineers. You never said you were an executive. I told you I got promoted to a leadership role 3 years ago. You said you didn't care about the details. I tried to show you our tax returns multiple times. You said you didn't need to see them because you already understood our financial situation. Every attempt I made to share this with you, you shut down because it didn't fit your narrative that I was mediocre and unsuccessful. Victor glanced at the divorce papers still sitting on the table. Mrs. Morrison, I don't typically involve myself in my employees' personal lives, but I've watched Daniel build our technical infrastructure from the ground up. He's one of the most talented technology leaders I've ever worked with. He could work anywhere. Google, Microsoft, Amazon would hire him tomorrow. He stays with Chen Technologies because he loves the work and believes in what we're building. He paused, his expression stern. And he works at a desk with the engineering teams instead of in an executive office because he believes in staying connected to the actual work. That's not lack of ambition. That's the kind of leadership philosophy that makes great companies. Your husband is exactly the kind of person most companies would kill to have in their leadership. Elena was shaking now, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Daniel, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think? Let you think what? That I was nobody? Elena, I tried to tell you. You didn't want to know. You were so invested in believing I was mediocre that you never asked basic questions about my role, my compensation, our finances. You decided who I was and refused to let reality interfere with your decision. This isn't fair. You hid this from me. I kept my work life professional and private, which is my right. You're my wife. You should have cared enough to actually know what I did, how much I made, what my position was. The fact that you spent 7 years married to me without knowing basic facts about my career tells me everything about how little you actually valued me. Victor Chen nodded to them both. I'll leave you to your conversation. But, Mrs. Morrison, a piece of advice. Before you divorce a man for lack of ambition, verify whether your assessment of his ambition is actually accurate. You're making a decision based on complete ignorance, and I suspect you're going to regret it profoundly. He returned to his table, leaving Elena and Daniel in tense silence. Around them, Other diners who'd overheard parts of the exchange were watching with poorly concealed interest. Elena had wanted a public setting to serve the divorce papers, and she'd gotten a public setting. But the public revelation hadn't gone the way she'd planned. "I need to go to the bathroom," Elena whispered, her voice shaking. She stood abruptly and walked quickly towards the back of the restaurant. Daniel sat alone at the table, staring at the divorce papers Elena had served with such confidence. He felt Victor's presence before the older man spoke. "I'm sorry for interfering," Victor said, sitting in Elena's vacant chair. "But I couldn't let her destroy you like that without at least pointing out the truth. The divorce attorneys would have revealed my actual income during asset division." "Perhaps, but better she finds out now. Here, when she's just humiliated herself publicly by announcing she's divorcing a CTO she thought was a nobody. Sometimes people need to see the immediate consequences of their assumptions. You think I should have told her sooner, forced her to listen?" Victor shook his head. "I think you gave her every opportunity to know you and she chose ignorance. That's on her, not you. The question now is what you do next. Sign the papers, I suppose. If she thinks I'm mediocre after 7 years of marriage, finding out I'm not isn't going to fix the fundamental problem. She doesn't love me, Victor. She tolerates me while feeling superior. Learning I'm successful changes her calculation, but it doesn't change who she is. You're probably right. But Daniel, make sure your divorce attorney is better than hers. Because when she realizes what she's actually walking away from, she's going to fight very hard to maximize her settlement." Elena returned to the table 15 minutes later, her makeup repaired, but her eyes red-rimmed. She sat down without speaking, staring at the divorce papers she'd served with such confidence an hour ago. "I've been thinking," Elena started, her voice careful. "Maybe we rushed into this. Maybe we should try counseling first, work on the marriage before making any final decisions. Now that you know I'm successful, suddenly the marriage is worth saving. That's not fair, Daniel. I'm just saying maybe I overreacted. Maybe I didn't have all the information and we should take time to rebuild a marriage where you spent 7 years mocking my lack of ambition without bothering to verify whether I actually lacked ambition. Elena, I'm the same person I was an hour ago when you handed me divorce papers. The only thing that changed is your knowledge of my income. If that's what makes me worth fighting for, then I'm not worth fighting for. You'd just be fighting for my bank account. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. You served me divorce papers on our anniversary, in public, after years of criticizing my career and my supposed mediocrity. You told me you deserved better than me. Well, now you get to find out what better looks like. Sign the papers. Elena, this marriage is over." I won't sign anything until we've had time to think about this properly." Daniel pulled out his phone and called his attorney, a friend from law school named Marcus Webb. "Marcus, it's Daniel Morrison. I need you to file a response to divorce papers my wife served me tonight. She's trying to back out now that she's discovered information about my finances. But I want the divorce to proceed." Elena's face went white. "Daniel, please, don't do this. We can work this out." Daniel ignored her, finishing his call with Marcus and arranging a meeting for the next morning. When he hung up, he looked at Elena with something close to pity. "You had 7 years to work this out, Elena. 7 years to actually know me, to value me, to build a partnership with me. You chose to spend those 7 years feeling superior while being completely ignorant of reality. You served me divorce papers in a public restaurant on our anniversary. You don't get to take it back now that the calculation changed. So, that's it? You're just going to divorce me without even trying to save our marriage? I'm just signing the death certificate." Daniel stood, left $200 on the table to cover the bill, and walked out of Marcello's. Behind him, Elena sat alone at the table, surrounded by divorce papers she no longer wanted and watched by curious diners who'd witnessed her spectacular miscalculation. The divorce proceedings were exactly as contentious as Victor had predicted. Elena initially refused to cooperate, trying to delay the process while she figured out how to maximize her settlement. Her attorney, once he learned about Daniel's actual income and assets, immediately revised their settlement demands upward by several orders of magnitude. Elena was now seeking half of everything. Half of Daniel's equity in Chen Technologies, half of his investment accounts, half of the value of their home, and substantial ongoing spousal support based on Daniel's $800,000 annual income rather than the $150,000 she'd assumed he made. Daniel's attorney, Marcus Webb, was a shark in divorce court, and he came prepared with documentation of everything Elena had said and done. He had the divorce papers Elena had served in a public restaurant. He had testimony from dinner guests at previous social gatherings where Elena had mocked Daniel's career. He had text messages where Elena had complained to friends about her unsuccessful husband. He had a recording, legal in Illinois, of Elena telling her sister 3 months ago that she was planning to divorce Daniel and find someone more successful. Most damagingly, Marcus had a statement from Victor Chen detailing how many times Daniel had invited Elena to company events, where his executive status would have been obvious, and how many times Elena had declined because she found tech company functions boring. Victor's statement made it clear that Elena had willfully avoided opportunities to understand Daniel's actual role. "Your Honor," Marcus argued during a settlement hearing, Mrs. Morrison spent 7 years of marriage refusing to engage with her husband's career, declining to attend company functions, refusing to review financial documents, and publicly mocking him for supposed lack of ambition. She served divorce papers in a public restaurant on their anniversary, confident that she was escaping from an unsuccessful marriage. She only attempted to retract those papers when a third party revealed information about Mr. Morrison's actual income that she could have discovered herself at any time. He held up the divorce petition Elena had served. "This document says irreconcilable differences." Mrs. Morrison claimed the marriage was irreparably broken. She's only claiming otherwise now because she realized her assumptions about her husband's income were wrong. That's not a wife who wants to save her marriage. That's a wife who realized she miscalculated financially. Elena's attorney tried to argue that Daniel had deliberately deceived Elena about his position. But Marcus demolished that argument with evidence of Daniel's repeated attempts to discuss his work and Elena's consistent refusal to listen. The judge, a woman in her 50s who'd clearly heard plenty of divorce cases, reviewed the evidence with a skeptical eye toward Elena's claims. "Mrs. Morrison, let me understand your position," the judge said. "You served your husband divorce papers in a public restaurant, claiming the marriage was over due to irreconcilable differences. You told him in that restaurant that you deserved better than his mediocrity, and that you wanted to find someone more ambitious. You did all of this without knowing your husband's actual job title, his actual income, or his actual assets. Is that correct?" "I didn't know because he didn't tell me," Elena said, her voice shaking. "The evidence shows he tried to tell you multiple times and you refused to engage. The evidence shows you declined to attend company events where his position would have been obvious. The evidence shows you never once asked to see a tax return or financial statement in 7 years of marriage. Is that also correct?" "Mrs. Morrison, you don't get to unring this bell. You filed for divorce based on your assessment that your husband was mediocre and unsuccessful. The fact that your assessment was completely wrong doesn't entitle you to a larger settlement or to retract your petition. You're getting divorced, as you requested. The only question is what settlement is fair under Illinois law." The final settlement was determined by Illinois' equitable distribution laws. Elena received half of the marital assets accumulated during the 7 years of marriage, which included half the increase in home equity, half the joint savings accounts, and half the retirement accounts. But she didn't receive any portion of Daniel's equity in Chen Technologies, because that equity was largely compensation for work performed. similar to salary, and Illinois courts typically don't divide future equity compensation. The final number was approximately $1 million, a substantial sum by any measure, but far less than the multi-million-dollar settlement Elena and her attorney had been seeking. The judge also denied Elena's request for ongoing spousal support beyond 3 years, noting that Elena was college-educated, employed, and perfectly capable of supporting herself, and that the length of the marriage didn't warrant long-term support. Mrs. Morrison, you're receiving a 7-figure settlement from a 7-year marriage, the judge said at the final hearing. That's quite generous. You'd be receiving significantly more if you'd stayed married to your successful husband, but you chose to end that marriage based on faulty assumptions. Choices have consequences. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Elena served those papers at Marcello's. She moved out of the house she'd never realized Daniel owned outright, took her settlement, and largely disappeared from their mutual social circles, humiliated by how publicly her miscalculation had been revealed. Daniel heard through friends that Elena had struggled to adjust to life post-divorce. The $1 million settlement seemed like a lot until she tried to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to while married to Daniel. She'd bought a nice condo, but it wasn't the house she'd had. She'd continued working in marketing, but her $50,000 salary was a stark contrast to the combined $850,000 household income she'd been living on without realizing it, and dating was apparently difficult. Men who learned that Elena had divorced her CTO husband for being mediocre tended to be wary of her values and judgment. About a year after the divorce, Daniel ran into Elena at a charity event. She was there with a date, a man who worked in finance and seemed pleasant enough. Elena looked good, but tired, with a brittleness around her eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. "Daniel," she said when they found themselves near the bar at the same time, "you look well." "Thank you, you too. I've been wanting to apologize for how I handled everything. I was cruel and stupid, and I destroyed something good because I couldn't see what I had. I appreciate that. Do you ever think about what might have been different if I'd just paid attention? If I'd actually listened when you tried to tell me about your work?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I think the problem was deeper than just you not knowing my job title. The problem was that you measured my worth by external markers of success: job title, salary, social status. Even if you'd known I was a CTO, you might have found other ways I didn't measure up to your expectations. The fundamental issue was how you defined value." "That's probably true," Elena admitted. "I was shallow. I wanted the Instagram life, more than I wanted a real partnership. I'm trying to be different now, but it's hard to change who you are at your core. I hope you find happiness, Elena. I hope you find someone whose external success matches your internal requirements. And I hope you learn to value substance over status. Are you seeing anyone?" "Not seriously. I've been focusing on work and on figuring out what I actually want from a relationship. Someone who values you for who you are, I imagine. Someone who's curious enough to actually know me. That's the baseline." Elena's date appeared, and she made introductions before excusing herself. Daniel watched her go, feeling nothing but mild melancholy for what could have been if Elena had been different. If she'd been capable of valuing him without needing external validation of his success. 2 years after the divorce, Daniel met someone at a technology conference in San Francisco. Her name was Sophie Zhang. She was a senior engineering manager at a biotech company, and their first conversation was about the challenges of leading technical teams in companies dominated by business-focused executives. "The hardest part is staying connected to the actual work, while also handling executive responsibilities," Sophie said, over conference coffee. "I still want to understand code, still want to review architecture decisions, but there's pressure to move into a pure management role and leave the technical work behind. I've struggled with that same balance." Daniel replied. I'm CTO at my company, but I still work at a desk with the engineering teams because I don't want to lose touch with what they're actually dealing with. That's unusual. Most CTOs I know are pure executives at this point. Most people think it's strange. My ex-wife thought it meant I lacked ambition. Sophie laughed. Your ex-wife sounds like she didn't understand what real leadership looks like. They dated long distance for 8 months, taking turns flying between Chicago and San Francisco on weekends. Sophie knew from their first conversation what Daniel did, what his role was, what his values were about work and leadership. They talked openly about finances, career goals, what they wanted from life. There were no assumptions, no hidden information, no willful ignorance. I appreciate that you're straightforward about everything, Sophie told Daniel about 6 months into their relationship. My ex-boyfriend used to play games, test me by hiding things to see how I'd react. It was exhausting. My ex-wife made assumptions without verification, and then got angry when reality didn't match her assumptions. Daniel replied, I learned that honesty up front, even when it's uncomfortable, prevents much bigger problems later. They married 18 months after meeting, and Sophie relocated to Chicago to take a VP position at a biotech firm there. They bought a new house together, larger than Daniel's first home, and built a life that was theirs, rather than a reflection of assumptions or status concerns. This is what partnership looks like, Marcus Webb said during his toast at their wedding reception. 2 people who actually know each other, who value competence and character over status and appearance, who built their relationship on honesty rather than assumptions. Daniel's first marriage taught him the cost of being with someone who didn't care enough to know him. Sophie's presence here shows he learned that lesson well. 5 years after his divorce from Elena, Daniel was promoted to president of Chen Technologies when Victor Chen stepped into a chairman role. Daniel finally agreed to take an executive office, though he still spent significant time working directly with engineering teams. Sophie became CTO of her biotech company, and they often laughed about being a dual executive household where both of them preferred working with technical teams over executive posturing. They had a daughter, traveled extensively, and built something successful by their own definition rather than by external measures. Daniel occasionally thought about that anniversary dinner at Marcello's, about Elena sliding divorce papers across the table with such confidence. She'd been so certain she was escaping mediocrity, so sure she deserved better. And she'd been completely, embarrassingly wrong. But he didn't think about it with satisfaction or vindication. He thought about it with sadness for what could have been if Elena had been different, if she'd valued him for who he was, rather than who she assumed he was. And he thought about it with gratitude that the experience had taught him to value people who were curious, who asked questions, who cared enough to actually know the people in their lives. The story of Daniel and Elena's anniversary dinner carries lessons that extend far beyond one failed marriage. First and foremost, never make life-changing decisions based on assumptions you haven't verified. Elena decided to divorce Daniel based on her belief that he was mediocre and unsuccessful, without ever verifying whether that belief was accurate. That willful ignorance cost her everything. We learn that public humiliation often comes to those who make confident pronouncements based on wrong information. Elena chose a public setting to serve divorce papers because she wanted control and wanted to prevent Daniel from making a scene. Instead, she created a public spectacle of her own ignorance when the truth was revealed. The story teaches us that measuring your partner's worth by external markers of success, job titles, salaries, social status, is a fundamental character flaw that creates toxic relationships. Elena valued the idea of success over actual substance, cared more about what Daniel's job sounded like than what he actually accomplished. We see that refusing to engage with your partner's work and career because you've decided it's boring or unsuccessful is a form of willful ignorance that will destroy relationships. Elena declined company events, refused to discuss Daniel's work, avoided financial conversations. That wasn't just disinterest. It was active avoidance of information that might challenge her assumptions. The story reveals that people who only value you once they learn about your wealth or status never actually valued you at all. Elena tried to retract her divorce papers once she learned Daniel's true position. But that didn't reflect love. It reflected calculation. Her feelings hadn't changed. Only her knowledge of his bank account had changed. We learned that trying to control a situation through public setting can backfire spectacularly when you don't actually control the information. Elena thought serving papers in a restaurant would prevent conflict. Instead, it created the perfect setting for her ignorance to be publicly exposed. Most importantly, the story shows us that assumptions based on superficial observations, how someone dresses, where they work, what their day-to-day looks like, are almost always wrong when it comes to success and capability. Daniel dressed casually, worked at a regular desk, lived modestly. None of that indicated his actual position or income, but Elena never looked beyond the surface. The call to action is clear. Ask questions about the important aspects of your partner's life and career. Don't make assumptions based on superficial observations or decide you already know everything worth knowing. Verify your beliefs. Attend your partner's work events. Engage with their professional life. Show interest in what they do even if it seems technical or boring. Your engagement shows respect and prevents you from being ignorant about significant aspects of their life. Review financial documents in your marriage, tax returns, pay stubs, investment accounts. Know what your household's actual financial situation is, not what you assume it is. Measure your partner's worth by their character, their values, how they treat people, and what they actually accomplish, not by how impressive their job title sounds or how much social status it conveys. Recognize that people who work modestly and avoid executive trappings might be doing so from a position of confidence and strong values, not from lack of success or ambition. Finally, understand that serving divorce papers publicly with confidence, based on wrong assumptions, makes you look foolish, not powerful. Confidence without knowledge is just arrogance, and it will be revealed as such. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about assumptions you've made or information you haven't verified, share it with someone who needs this message. Subscribe to hear more stories about assumptions revealed, public humiliations earned, and the critical importance of actually knowing your partner rather than assuming you do. May you ask questions instead of making assumptions. May you engage with your partner's life instead of avoiding it. May you verify your beliefs before making life-changing decisions based on them. And may you never serve divorce papers in a public restaurant without first knowing who's sitting at the nearby tables and what they know about your spouse. Remember, when you confidently announce you're divorcing your husband for being mediocre, make absolutely certain he's actually mediocre first, because sometimes the person sitting 2 tables behind you is his CEO, and your public declaration of his inadequacy will become a public revelation of your ignorance. Assumptions delivered with confidence don't become truth. They just become embarrassing when reality emerges.